Stand up now, this seat is mine.
No. My boarding pass says 2B, and I will stay.
You don't belong in this seat.
This is my seat, and I'm not moving.
People like you shouldn't be in first class. Isn't that why?
I earned this seat. I belong here.
Around them, the air thickened, passengers held their breath, and justice itself seemed to hover between the rows. Could fairness survive when power chose rules over truth? And then, a moment later, something happened that made the entire cabin fall still. You have your own thoughts. Do you agree with the way she stood her ground? Share them below, and don't forget to like and follow for more. Angela Carter sat in seat 2B as the cabin settled into that muted hush that always arrived just before pushback. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and warm plastic. Coats rustled, overhead bins clicked, and the low chime of a safety announcement faded into the quiet. Outside the windows of San Francisco International, a pale autumn light slid across the tarmac where service trucks idled like patient cattle. Angela had flown this route many times, but the week before Thanksgiving gave everything a particular charge. Families reuniting, business travelers squeezing in one last meeting, attendants moving with brisk, choreographed ease. She read with calm attention, one leg crossed over the other, the glossy pages of a financial magazine whispering beneath her fingers. She noticed the holiday wreath hanging near the boarding door, the paper turkeys taped onto a galley cupboard, the way small rituals, greetings, please and thank you, a nod for an extra napkin made a crowded space feel human. Somewhere forward, an attendant laughed gently at a joke. Somewhere aft, a baby burbled and then settled. The man appeared the way a gust appears sudden, insistent, pushing the air ahead of him. He planted one palm on the headrest of seat 2B and leaned down as if he were about to confer private mercy. His eyes swept Angela with the quick confidence of someone who expected the world to align around his plans. His boarding pass was already unfolded in his other hand, the name block creased from being pinched too tightly. A few passengers glanced up, the way people do in churches when a hymn falters. From the aisle across, a middle-aged couple paused mid-conversation and exchanged the kind of look that says, "Here we go." The attendant at the forward galley took one step toward them and then paused. Her tray of plastic cups caught a bar of light. Angela marked her place with a fingertip and raised her gaze. Her voice, when it came, was even and unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to waiting out a storm rather than racing into it. She asked how she could help. The man later, Angela would learn his name, but for now he was only the edge of a problem. Tapped the print on his ticket and explained that seat 2B was his. He spoke with the genial certainty of a manager hurrying through a pre-holiday checklist. He asked where her seat actually was, as if they had both been caught in an innocent mix-up. Angela's eyes softened slightly. She slid her own boarding pass from the pocket of the seat in front of her, the cardstock firm and unbent, and held it so he could see the bolded 2B. She smiled politely. He did not look at the letters for long. A thin ripple moved through the cabin, small as a draft but unmistakable. The couple across the aisle lowered their voices to a whisper. A man in row 3 angled his phone so that its black glass became a little mirror. In it, one could see the man's cheeks turning the color of late-day wine. Angela set her magazine down, spine aligned with her lap, and kept her hands visible as if to place them where suspicion could not. He sighed, he chuckled. He said that these things happen. But he had paid for this seat months ago and needed to make a connection in New York. He mentioned the dinner reservation on the Upper West Side and a client who did not appreciate excuses. His words were cordial, but there was undertone an old, familiar chord that pressed on a listener's dignity like a thumb on a bruise. Angela breathed in. The aircraft smelled now of citrus cleaner and the faint salt of someone's sandwich. She pointed again, gently, to the assignment on her card. The man's smile tilted. He asked, still genial, whether perhaps she had upgraded at the gate and taken the wrong side by mistake, and in that phrase, the mistake lived only on her. One of the attendants, her name tag read Emily, and she had the careful posture of someone still new enough to believe in perfect procedures, hovered a row away, and said she would find someone to take a look. Angela thanked her and returned the boarding pass to its place, sliding it with a neat precision that made the action feel like a statement. She was aware of her own breathing, of the way her heart kept an ordinary rhythm despite the added ice. She had learned long ago that calm was not silence. Calm could be a voice. Across the aisle, a man with silver hair commented to his seatmate that he had seen this before, people slipping into business class like churchgoers slipping into a pew they had not tithed for. The seatmate grunted. Outside, a baggage car trundled by, dragging a dull clatter behind it. The plane felt anchored, as if indecision itself had weight. Angela thought, briefly, of the calls she would take in New York. The meeting scheduled for the morning after Thanksgiving, when half the city would be asleep and the other half shopping, and how often the world asked her to be both patient and precise. She uncrossed her legs and straightened her blazer and looked up again at the man, who had not moved and now seemed to swell to fill the aisle. He leaned closer, as if intimacy would be persuasive. He told her that he did not want to make a fuss. He suggested that if she would simply slide back a roll until it got sorted, everyone would be happy. He said it with a chirp of a compromise, all beneficence on the surface. But his hand was still on her headrest, and his breath spread a warm, unwanted circle. Angela asked, again with courtesy, that he speak with the crew so they could scan the tickets and verify the manifest. She kept her palms open on her knees. He stared at her, blinked, and then changed the key. He lifted his chin toward the forward galley and announced, louder now, that there was a misunderstanding up here, that someone had taken the wrong seat. Conversations within 3 rows fell off a cliff. The silver-haired man stopped pretending to scroll. The couple across the aisle tightened their mouths into little seams. Angela felt, more than saw, how strangers arranged themselves around an event. An attendant arrived with the soft authority of someone walking into a family argument. She asked for both boarding passes. The man handed him over with relief, like a child surrendering a secret note. Angela handed hers without flourishing. The attendant checked both her brow knitting, then said she would be right back and that she appreciated their patience. The man laughed under his breath, a sound that managed to be both friendly and dismissive. He looked at Angela as if to say, "There, you see how this goes." She returned his look with the same quiet watchfulness she would give a ticking instrument panel. Around them, the cabin resumed its low murmuring. But the conversations now seemed thinner, more brittle, as if everyone had switched to talking about the weather. A minute, maybe 2, but it felt like a little winter passed. And the attendant returned with another, older employee in tow, a man with a clipboard and a practiced smile that said he had tidied up 100 such tangles. They consulted, spoke into a small radio, and then conferred with the man, who nodded vigorously, tapping his ticket. Angela watched their eyes, the way they slid to the man and then to her as if following a script, the way habit can become a policy without anyone naming it. She thought of the way airports teach a person to be very still while everything moves quickly around them. The clipboard man asked Angela, with apologetic politeness, to confirm her full name. She gave it to me. He thanked her and said they would get it sorted in just a moment. "Ma'am," and the word ma'am landed with the weight of a tiny hand on the shoulder, gentle and heavy. The man's genial tone thinned. He said he did not mean to hold up the flight, but that some people do not understand how seating works. He said it was like a weather report, neutral and inevitable. A few rows back, someone sighed. Angela felt the smallest ache in her jaw and let it go. She remembered the warm kitchen light in her childhood home on the south side, where her mother had taught her the trick of staying composed while boiling water whistled behind you. She returned her gaze to the window and saw her own reflection layered over a distant jet lifting into pale sky. When she turned back, the older employee was gone, the newer attendant was on the radio again, and the man had shifted his stance to occupy more of the aisle. The cabin's temperature seemed to drop half a degree. The attendant came back, and her smile this time held worry, the kind that hopes to be invisible and is not. She explained that there appeared to be a duplicate assignment for 2B. She said the gate would need to verify the system, that sometimes the computer carried an old change into a new manifest. The man brightened, as if the universe had just remembered its obligations to him. He suggested, cheerfully now, that Angela move back 1 row just for a minute, and he promised he would buy her a drink to make up for the confusion. The couple across the aisle exchanged a glance that contained a whole Thanksgiving table's worth of subtext. Angela thanked the attendant again and said she would prefer to remain in her assigned seat until the verification was complete. Her tone did not change. The man did. His next sentence arrived like a draft under a door, small, cold, intended to be felt more than heard. He said some people do not know their place. The words did not need to be loud to carry. They slid through the cabin and found quiet places to echo. The silver-haired man's mouth tugged to one side. The woman with him adjusted the scarf at her throat and looked down. The attendant's radio hissed softly. Angela had heard sentences like that before, dressed in other clothes, spoken with other smiles. She let the moment pass through her, counted a slow breath, and kept her eyes steady. A second attendant brought a tray of water down the aisle. setting one on her armrest with a nod so small it might have been imagined. Outside, a gull rode a pocket of air and then knifed away. The plane remained at the gate. The holiday wreath near the boarding doors stirred when someone opened the forward galley curtain. The atmosphere felt like pressure building behind glass. The man shifted again, impatient now, the genial veneer cracking at the edges. He said he could not be late, that he had obligations, that surely she could see this was an honest mistake, and the simplest solution was to stand up and let the crew handle it. Angela straightened the line of her blazer and answered that she had presented her boarding pass and would wait for the system check. She did not lift her voice. If anything, the calm thickened. People listened harder to what is not said. Somewhere aft, a child laughed. A moment later, a parent shushed gently, the way a shush can carry love. The forward chime dinged. A voice over the speaker thanked passengers for their patience and mentioned a slight delay. The words slight delay drew a small chorus of groans. The man looked around as if to recruit witnesses to his cause. A few avoided his eyes. One or two offered sympathetic shrugs. The attendant on the radio turned her shoulder and spoke into it with the concentration of a surgeon tying a knot. Angela folded her magazine, aligning its edges to the millimeter, and placed it in the seat pocket. She had learned, over years and miles, that dignity is not an ornament but a tool. The aisle, for a breath, cleared. In that breath, something shifted inside Angela. Not a change of mood so much as a click of engagement. Like a gear finding its teeth, she understood now that the next voice, the next glance, the next decision would tilt the entire moment. She watched the galley curtain, the angle of the attendant's chin, the way the man's fingers drummed a private impatience on the plastic of the headrest. She did not raise her hands, did not announce her history, did not summon any righteousness. She simply waited with the steadiness of someone who knows that storms burn themselves out. The compartment door opened, and Linda Moore, a veteran gate employee, walked in, her eyes immediately stopping at Angela. Emily Johnson sat angled toward the aisle, a slim backpack tucked beneath her legs, and the navy scarf looped twice at her throat. The cabin light had that mellow autumn gold that made everyone look a little softer, but tension sharpened the air like static before a storm. She had noticed the exchange in seat 2B. The way you notice a string pulled too tight on the violin, first a tremor, then a wobble, then the sense that the whole melody might snap. She glanced at the woman in 2B, at the man leaning into her space with that friendly, insistent posture that meant the conversation was no longer a conversation. Emily's thumb hovered over her lock screen, then pressed. The camera opened to a front lens reflection of her own serious face. The second lens caught the aisle beyond, and her voice dropped to a whisper meant for strangers and for conscience alike. Guys, you will not believe what is happening right now. The little red light of the recording felt like a responsibility. She had grown up in a house where her grandmother kept a transistor radio playing public news all day, where you said good morning to the bus driver, tipped the diner waitress with coins and folded bills, and called neighbors by name. The world, her grandmother said, does not change because you shout, it changes because you notice. Emily tilted her phone to frame the woman's calm and the man's widening impatience. Her stream went live to a modest handful and then began to climb, names floating up like paper lanterns. She mouthed a quiet summary. A seat dispute in business class, a woman minding her own seat, a man certain she did not belong, and a hush that kept filling with judgment. The plane smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. Somewhere forward, eyes chimed in a tumbler. Angela Carter kept her hands where everyone could see them, resting on her knees. Fingers relaxed, palms open, and that openness read as strength. Thomas Reynolds had shifted from genial to managerial, as if the aisle were his conference room and the passengers his reluctant staff. He smiled without warmth. He explained as though he were doing everyone a favor, and favors, he implied, ought to be accepted quickly and without protest. Emily watched Angela ask for the crew to verify the manifest. The request was measured, respectful, and simple. Still, the man sighed. He lifted his ticket like a credential and shook it once. A paper flag. Across the aisle, a silver-haired passenger leaned toward his partner and made a soft comment that was meant to be private and was not. A wreath by the boarding door gave a small, unnecessary tremble each time the galley curtain moved. The senior gate agent, Linda Moore, arrived with a quick stride of someone used to untangling knots. Years of airport floors had taught her to smile even as she assessed, to reassure even as she decided. She asked for both boarding passes. She glanced at both names. She promised she would be right back. Her tone rested naturally on the man, as if gravity itself pulled authority his way. Emily felt her stomach tighten and told the stream what she was noticing without using any words that would inflame. The soft bias of attention, the little ways trust gets handed to one person and not to another. Comments began to drift up: be safe, thank you for documenting, show both tickets, do not show faces too close. Emily steadied the phone in her palm and kept her voice low. She narrated the small details for people who could only feel the room through her: the hum of the ventilation, the sheen of the aisle carpet, the way Angela's breathing stayed even. Linda returned with David Lopez, the flight supervisor, a tablet under his arm. Together they consulted, and together their eyes moved between the man's expectation and the woman's composure. The tablet beeped a neat, official beep, the kind of sound that makes people reassured even when it offers no answers. David spoke into a radio clip to his belt, and somewhere beyond the curtain, a printer clacked out a short run of paper like teeth. Angela thanked them for checking. She did not fill the silence with explanation. Emily felt the comments take up, viewers multiplying, questions stacking, and tried to keep the lens calm, avoiding the easy drama of a close-up. She panned instead across hands and ticket stock and the embroidered name on Linda's blazer. She told her watchers that patience could be a form of power. Thomas adjusted his stance, bracing an elbow on the headrest as if holding up the roof. He switched to another tone, the one that sounds like a compromise but is only a more polite command. He told Angela that the quickest way to help everyone would be to step back to the next row until the system caught up. He said the word everyone 3 times in as many sentences. Linda, meaning well and moving fast, floated an option about a temporary seat in economy until the computer fixed itself. The suggestion landed not as help, but as displacement. Emily felt heat rise behind her ears. She heard the gentlest click inside herself, the moral metronome that said the line was close. She narrated what was being suggested, letting the audience hear the terms as plainly as she did, avoiding adjectives that might let the airline off the hook for making the ask. The plane announced a slight delay in a voice meant to soothe. Slight delay became murmurs, and wristwatches became an extra sip of water and a refolded newspaper. Emily held the phone steady as a hand resting on the railing. She explained, for the hundreds watching now, how boarding passes are scanned, how duplicate assignments sometimes happen, how policy ought to treat both parties as equal until the system shows a clear answer. She kept her sentences clean and the numbers in words, so the voice software would read them like a bedtime story and not like an auction. She saw Linda's face crease, and she hoped the camera saw the crease too. Because her viewers were not here to hate, they were here to witness people doing their best, and sometimes doing it wrong. Thomas laughed softly, a sound with an edge in it. He said this woman clearly did not understand airplane seating. The word clearly was a blade wrapped in velvet. It split the air without seeming to. A passenger in row 3 paused mid-sip. The couple across the aisle tightened in their seats as if the cabin had cooled. Angela did not flinch. She set her magazine carefully folded into the seat pocket. Her posture held a steadiness that did not require stillness. Her eyes were active, taking in the attendants, the tablet, the man's hands, the distance to the galley. Emily said to the stream that it was getting harder to film without her own hands shaking. She described the cold shine of the overhead bins, the way the light made a quiet cathedral out of the space, and how faith in fairness, like faith in any church, asked you to keep singing even when one voice went flat. Linda leaned in again, offering the same apology in new words. David nodded with practiced gravity. The radio hissed a breathy code. The wreath by the door made one more little quiver as someone passed. Emily took that small choreography as her cue to widen the frame and include the faces of the other passengers without exposing them. A sleeve, a ringed hand, a profile in half shadow. She told the watchers that most people were listening now without pretending not to, the way a neighborhood listens when a siren stops on your block. She spoke of the weight a calm woman can carry for a whole room, and she named the way the room starts to lean either toward fairness or away from it. The chat sent up a stream of simple words: respect, patience, truth. Thomas's voice changed again. It shed the genial and kept the command. The sentence came soft as a draft and cold as one. Some people just do not know their place. It traveled farther than he intended. It always does. The words found the corners of the cabin and settled there like frost. Emily felt the line like a hand at her throat, and she knew her watchers felt it, because the chat exploded into the silent outrage that modern courtesy keeps behind a pane of glass. She forced her breath even and repeated the sentence into the stream as cleanly as she could, letting it sit on its own ugliness without adjectives to blunt or sharpen it. She kept the lens on Angela, not on the man, because the camera should honor the person subjected, not feed the person performing control. The aircraft remained parked at the gate, as if the plane itself refused to move forward while its passengers tried to decide what kind of people they were. The holiday decorations looked suddenly fragile, the paper turkeys thin as leaves. Linda spoke into her radio again, words clipped and careful, asking for final verification of the manifest. David checked the list on his tablet and rubbed his temple with 2 fingers. Thomas spread his hands to the immediate congregation and offered a congenial plea on behalf of the whole plane's schedule, a litany of other people's time he claimed to respect while demanding this woman's place. Emily described the cadence for the growing crowd on her stream. The polite ask, the soft push, the procedure, the ask again, the escalation that pretends not to escalate. Angela met all of it with the same grounded breath. She requested, once more, that the crew scan and confirm. She thanked them for their help. She did not volunteer to move. The restraint was its own sentence, a refusal without heat, a boundary drawn with a ruler. Emily thought of her grandmother's kitchen table and the way the old woman would rest both hands on the wood when a story mattered. She put both hands on the armrest now, stabilizing the phone against a small tremor in her wrist, and she told the stream that sometimes you keep your place by staying in it. The viewer count climbed in quiet numbers, each one a small presence sitting with her in row 2C, listening. The murmur in the cabin shifted some breath of change moving through bodies before it arrived in fact. Emily could not name it yet, so she named instead the details that would anchor the moment in memory. The lemon-polished tongue, the thin scrape of a car's wheel, the tick of a watch that someone forgot to silence, the way the wreath ribbon had one frayed end that no one could see unless they were standing close. She told her watchers she was not here to ignite anything, only to keep the lights on. She promised them she would be careful with faces and names. She described the patience on one side of the aisle and the entitlement on the other without using either word, and she trusted her audience to supply them. The aisle opened for a heartbeat, then filled. Shoes appeared, first sensible flats with airport miles on them, followed by a navy blazer and the practiced half smile meant to calm a room. Linda stepped in from the forward door with a small clipboard and a bigger authority, and the hush spread from row to row as if everyone knew that the shape of the moment was about to resolve. Emily steadied the lens. She framed Angela in the foreground and the uniforms beyond, one hand slightly outstretched as a guide, the other holding a document angled away from the camera. The plane's air felt denser, as if hundreds of people had drawn the same breath together and then held it. Angela's eyes lifted. Her fingers closed more firmly around the armrest, knuckles pale but steady, a single wholesome tension in a body otherwise at rest. Angela gripped the armrest of her chair tightly, but before she could reply, a deep voice rang out. "What's going on here?" Captain Robert Miller appeared. Captain Robert Miller stood square in the aisle with the composed impatience of a man who had done this too many times in too many airports. His cap brim threw a small crescent of shadow across his eyes. The rest of his face read duty, not malice, but duty can harden into habit if no one interrupts it. The forward chime had barely faded. The wreath near the boarding door trembled once. A little theater curtain in the draft. Angela Carter, still in seat 2B, met the captain's gaze with a steady calm that did not challenge him and did not yield. Behind the calm, the tension in the cabin braided itself tighter. Conversations died mid-syllable. Napkins paused halfway to mouth. Emily Johnson's phone hovered at lap level so the lens could see without imposing, its unseen red light carrying hundreds of quiet witnesses. Outside the windows, a misting rain had begun, stippling the tarmac with freckles of silver. On the overhead screen, a message in polite font announced a departure delayed by 12 minutes. The way the numbers sat there felt like a countdown no one owned. The captain spoke in a firm tone of procedure. He wanted the aisle clear. The disagreement settled off the aircraft. The flight released back to its timeline. He used the softeners professionals use when they hope not to bruise. Ma'am, please, resolve. The words were correct, the balance of them, not quite. Linda Moore, shoulders squared by 18 years of long gaze and short tempers, stood a half step behind him with her radio at her hip. A few inches to her left waited David Lopez, the flight supervisor, tablet folded like a hymn book against his chest. Thomas Reynolds kept his hand on the headrest as if ownership could travel through plastic. His smile returned, the relieved smile of a man who believes the world has remembered how it is supposed to work. He nodded toward the door as if inviting a guest to step into a drawing room. Angela rested her fingertips on her knees and inhaled once. the kind of breath that measures a room. This was not confusion. This was a choice presented as a favor. Around them, passengers became a chorus of small tales, throats cleared, legs crossed, eyes lowered or widened, a magazine turned without being read. The smell of coffee had cooled into cardboard and lemon polish. Somewhere aft, ice shifted in a drawer with the clink of distant cutlery. Emily told her unseen audience, in a whisper made for radios and kitchen tables, that a captain had arrived and that the task was to move the woman so the plane could leave. She named no villains. She described the sequence. She let the facts carry their own weight. Angela stood. The cabin felt as if it rose with her. She did not rush. She did not stiffen her shoulders to armor. She smoothed a sleeve habit, not vanity, and glanced toward the window where rain now drew tiny cursive along the glass. Her leather briefcase, tucked beneath the seat, caught a thread of light. She slid it out with care and set it upright by her shin. The gesture was ordinary and careful, in the way a person is careful with something that matters. Thomas's eyes flicked to the case and back to her face. His smile narrowed. He explained to the captain that he had paid for this seat months ago, that he could not miss a connection, that everyone's time was valuable, and that he appreciated the airline's help keeping things orderly. He liked the word orderly. It did work for him. He said it again. Captain Miller reiterated the task, adding a layer of institutional courtesy that was meant to ease the temperature and did not. He told Angela they could verify everything at the gate and return her as appropriate. He said, as appropriate, the way people say, we will see. Linda glanced from the captain to David to the tablet and back again. The radio at her hip hissed a few syllables. A code, a name, a gate number. David shifted his weight and kept his eyes professional and bland. Emily kept her hands rather than faces. The captain's right hand relaxed but decisive. Angela's resting on the suitcase handle, Thomas's fingers drumming a private impatience on the headrest seam. Another passenger, the silver-haired man from across the aisle, sat very straight, as if posture were a way to be neutral. Angela asked, gently, whether the manifest had been scanned a second time since the duplicate was noted. She thanked Linda for working to confirm. She did not add the sentence that pressed like a stone against her tongue, the one about how confirmation is not the same as deference. The captain said the system would be more easily checked from the jet bridge. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Authority, when worn this long, speaks at room volume. Angela thought of early mornings years ago when her mother would pause over a simmering pot and say, in a tone that made a kitchen holy, stand where you are, love, and let them come to you. She let the memory pass across her face like a small light. Thomas pivoted slightly so that his shoulder blocked part of the aisle. He said, almost affably, that people made honest mistakes in seating all the time. He said that moving for a moment would save everyone a lot of grief. He said everyone again and again, and with each repetition, the word meant all others but not her. A murmur grazed through the rows and then died. Emily felt her phone trembling from her own hands and steadied it against the armrest, the way you steady an old radio to catch a station at the edge of reception. She narrated, for the unseen, the calm in Angela's voice and the pressure in the room, the difference between a request and the removal when the person being asked has done nothing wrong. The overhead screen did not change its mind for about 12 minutes. A cart in the galley clicked, stopped, clicked again. A child somewhere behind them asked a parent why the plane was not flying yet, and the parent gave the soft answer people give to protect small hearts. Almost. The wreath by the boarding door hung still now. All drafts had been pulled into this moment. Linda said she was sorry for the confusion. David confirmed that the gate could print a fresh list in under a minute if they stepped outside. The captain's hand made a small, direct gesture, not a command, and, of course, a command, and he took half a step backward to open a path. Angela reached for the briefcase handle and paused. She did not want a scene. She did not want an audience. She wanted fairness to work like gravity, reliable without announcement. But fairness is a law only when people agree to be bound by it. The pressure of the room of the holiday calendar and the packed connection banks and the rehearsed politeness of airports leaned on her like a weather front. She could feel how the story would be told if she stepped out. A misunderstanding, a quick correction, a plane doing its job. She could feel the other story too, the truer one, if she did not. A woman holding her place with nothing but patience and facts. She loosened her fingers and let her hand fall back to her side. The briefcase rested against her leg like a period, a pause that belonged. Thomas almost laughed, a brief, bright note edged with relief, and then smoothed it into a supportive grin. He thanked the captain for handling it, as if delegating a task. He reassured the rows behind him that they would be on their way in no time. He pointed a smile at the couple across the aisle and received a pair of brittle nods in return. Emily watched the social math play out the nods people offer not to agree but to end discomfort. She remembered the advice of her grandmother, say what you see and let the scene do the work. She said softly to the stream that a woman was being asked to leave a seat that matched the words on her card, and the man contesting it had used a sentence about people not knowing their place. The chat climbed with careful, steady outrage. Each comment a small candle lit and set on the windowsill. The captain took another half step backward, clearing space. Linda touched the radio at her hip and asked the gate to hold the jet bridge door. David angled his tablet so the cabin lights did not glare. He met Angela's eyes for the first time and, for half a second, seemed to look past the procedure to the person. Then the second passed. The room waited on a pivot. The smell of rain came in through some seam no designer could ever seal. A paper cup rolled a quiet inch on a galley shelf. The pilot's badge on the captain's chest gleamed once and then dulled again. A woman 2 rows back did that tiny inhale people do before they cry and then stopped herself. Angela bent and lifted the briefcase. The handle creaked, a small leather sound. She set the case on the seat, the way one sets a book on the lectern. No one moved. She unclasped the brass latches with a practiced thumb, one and then the other, careful not to let the sound of them startle the tense air. In the phone's lens, Emily framed the case and Angela's hands and left faces beyond the edge. Thomas shifted from heel to toe, a dancer impatient for his cue. Linda's eyes lowered to the case and then rose again to Angela's face, and something in her posture softened by a hair's breadth. David's fingers tightened on the tablet's spine. The captain did not reach for anything. He waited because he had asked, and now he expected what he always expected at this point in the script. Angela lifted the lid. Inside, the documents lay in their ordered patience. Portfolios with heavy covers, a clip stack with the letterhead of quiet authority, a leather folio whose spine had been broken in where a hand always found it. She did not display them yet. She closed the lid with gentleness and rested her palm on it, the way a person settles a heartbeat. Her voice came level and low, fit for a microphone, fit for a radio, fit for a kitchen where 2 people try to tell the truth without breaking the plates. She looked at the captain, then at Linda, then at David, and finally at the man whose smile had now faded into a question he had not thought to ask himself. The cabin yielded her a pocket of silence in which to place her words. "Before I leave, maybe you should see this." Rain thickened on the window as if the sky had decided to underline the moment. The captain's hand hovered in that half-invitation, half-directive that asked a person to obey without saying the word obey. Angela let the silence stand, then eased the brass latches of her leather case with a soft click that the whole row seemed to hear. Paper waited inside in tidy, deliberate stacks. A letterhead whose serif letters did not shout. Minutes bound in a slim blue cover. A quarterly report with a narrow column of footnotes lined up like disciplined soldiers. The calm with which she handled them was its own declaration, a way of saying that facts can be tender and still carry weight. She lifted a single page, its watermark catching a slip of cabin light. Her voice remained low and even, a radio voice made for kitchens and late-night roads. She asked the captain if he would to take a quick look before asking her to step off. He did not reach for it immediately. Habit prefers its own path. Linda Moore, standing just off his right shoulder, accepted the page first. 18 years of gates and clipboards had taught her to read both text and the room around it. Her eyes moved smoothly down the letterhead, then stalled for the length of a heartbeat, then began again with more care. She passed the page to the captain without speaking. David Lopez, tablet folded against his chest, shifted just enough to see the header when the page changed hands. Emily, careful with her lens, kept the frame wide, letting viewers read posture instead of faces, breath instead of labels. The wreath by the boarding door did not stir. The captain read, "A man who has steered machines through weather and dark learns to keep his face a steady instrument." Even so, a few instruments flickered now. The brief tightness at the corner of his mouth, the tiny recalibration around his eyes, the way his shoulders rose a fraction and then settled as if accepting a weight that had been there all along but only just declared itself. He cleared his throat, not to speak, but to buy himself a second to refile the moment. Thomas's hand, still braced on the headrest of C2B, tightened and then loosened. He was ready to be gracious in victory. He had not rehearsed anything else. Angela did not push. She waited with the patience of someone who knows that truth grows louder when no one talks over it. The captain glanced at Linda. Linda's chin dipped a hair. David looked at the tablet and then at Angela, as if matching two maps. In the rows behind, the restless shift of passengers quieted into something like listening. There is a frequency a room takes on when it feels a pivot coming, a bass note under conversation, the whole place humming in one key. Emily named that feeling to the unseen audience in a whisper. Hold on. Angela took out a second document. A slim set of minutes stamped with a date written out in words. Its third page flagged by a clipped corner. She placed it beneath the first, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. She asked the captain to notice, if he would, the line recording a vote taken and the signatures below it. Linda, a professional at finding the line that matters, found it. Her lips parted as if to shape a question and then closed, because the answer sat under her finger. She drew a careful breath and let it out through her nose. David angled the tablet and keyed a quiet search, his thumb spelling out a name as if each letter could steady his breath. The search result, whatever it showed, stopped him moving for a beat. Thomas began to talk. When men like him feel ground tilt, they pour words like gravel into the crack. He praised the crew for their professionalism, admired the captain's calm, repeated that he had purchased the seat well in advance, and explained that any document could be misread in a rush. He sounded like a friendly memo. He laid the word confusion down as a rug over the floorboard everyone now heard creaking. He did not say the sentence he had said before, the one about people not knowing their place, but it hung in the air anyway, a faint perfume that truth could not stand. Angela set a third paper atop the others, a quarterly summary that did not boast, only counted. She did not point to numbers that can tangle a voice synthesizer, but spoke the words the page represented. She spoke of a stake held and of responsibility, of oversight, not as intrusion, but as care. She turned slightly so the captain and Linda and David stood within the same small circle of her attention. The captain folded the first page back to the letterhead and read the name at the top again. He knew pilots' lists and safety manuals by heart. He knew this name too, he realized, from earnings calls and industry briefings and the kind of email a cockpit receives when executives visit a hangar. Recognition moved across his face like a frown of weather, arriving without his permission and staying. Emily steadied her breathing for the benefit of the stream's text-to-speech, speaking slowly, choosing words that would land cleanly in the ears of people who were now thousands and rising. She said there was a document. She said the crew was looking. She said the woman in seat 2B remained calm, and that calm did not belong to surrender. In the chat, the words patience, dignity, and listening rose in a soft column. Someone typed, in all caps, a question that Emily did not read aloud. She knew that heat likes all caps, and she wanted light. Thomas tried another tack. He said he respected whoever the woman was and apologized for any misunderstanding and suggested that, of course, corporate people fly like anybody else, but that, in this case, given the delay, perhaps a brief relocation would still be the best course. He slid the word brief into the sentence like bomb. He smiled toward the rows behind him as if conscripting their time to his side. A few faces softened at the sound of apology, the way faces often do, trained by a million small transactions to accept polite noise in place of amends. Linda's posture did not change. David kept the tablet still, screen dark, his thumb frozen as if a page had asked him for patience. Angela did not look at Thomas. She looked at the captain. When she spoke, her tone carried both kindness and exactness, like a teacher reading a name out loud, like a pastor offering a benediction that is also a charge. She said she would not be stepping off the aircraft. She said she respected procedure, and she would honor it here and now by asking the people responsible for safety and fairness to consider the whole of the situation, not its pressure. She did not raise her volume. She did not need to. The plane's quiet had shifted from impatience to attention. The captain looked at the documents again. He squared the top page with the bottom page, a tidy reflex, and then met Angela's eyes. His voice, when it came, was level as a runway. He began to say he understood, stopped himself, and chose a different verb. He said he recognized. Recognition is not consent and not apology. It is the beginning of both. Thomas heard the word and did not understand it. He stepped closer by an inch and felt for the headrest again, as if the plastic could tether him. The wreath by the door held still as a promise. Angela let one more second pass. A human-sized pause in the metal room, then stood a fraction taller and placed the tip of one finger on the blue-bound minutes as if to bless them. I am the chairwoman of Carter Global Investments. We own a controlling stake in Delta Airlines. The sentence entered the cabin as quietly as it had left her mouth. and moved like a tide through every row. It relabeled the scene. It turned a man's certainty into a borrowed coat that did not fit. It put a different kind of weight into the captain's hands. Not the weight of a schedule, but the weight of care. Somewhere aft, a child's voice asked a simple question and was shushed gently. Somewhere forward, a glass touched the counter and made it clean. Bright sound like a pin dropped onto a map exactly where it belonged. For a long breath, nothing else happened. Then everything did. A passenger 2 rows back inhaled sharply. The silver-haired man across the aisle sat even straighter, as if someone had pulled a cord in his spine. Emily felt her pulse in her wrists and willed the phone not to tremble. In the stream, the viewer count ticked up not in leaps now, but in a steady climb. Names flowing across the screen like a procession. Linda's shoulders released a fraction. David's thumb moved again. This time not to search, but to compose himself around the fact. The captain nodded, just once. A small, constrained acknowledgement of a horizon he had not seen and now could not miss. He opened his mouth to speak. That's impossible. Lie. She owns the airline? The cabin held its breath as recognition settled over the crew like a new uniform. The captain's jaw eased. Linda's shoulders unhooked from their defensive brace, and David let his tablet drop to his side as if the numbers on it had turned into something human. A small, almost embarrassed rustle traveled the rows of passengers adjusting seatbelts that were already fastened, clearing throats that did not need clearing, performing the choreography people perform when the room decides to move in a better direction. Angela did not step forward to claim that shift. She allowed it to arrive, to reveal itself, and then she set the tone for what would follow. She lifted her chin a fraction, made eye contact with the captain, then with Linda and David, and finally with the man who had mistaken volume for authority. Her voice came warm and steady, a low glow more than a flame, each syllable landing with the weight of care rather than triumph. Without raising her volume, she made the space listen. She began by thanking the crew for pausing to review the facts. Gratitude, placed first, turned the temperature of the room from friction to attention. Then she drew a line with gentleness and precision, not to cut anyone, but to mark where respect begins. She spoke about procedure as a promise, about fairness as something that must be experienced, not just printed in a manual. The captain nodded once, a measured acknowledgement. He looked older and better in that moment, like a man who had decided to be led by the right thing rather than pushed by the fast thing. Thomas tried to wedge words into the space. Angela held apologies buried at the edges, caveats buffed until they shone, but the words did not find purchase. They slid away, a handful of dry pebbles on polished wood. Angela rested a palm on the back of C2B, grounding herself in the place that had been contested. She laid out what would happen next with the same calm that home cooks bring to a complicated recipe. No rush, no drama, only sequence and care. She said that harassment has consequences in every cabin, on every route, for every passenger. She said the airline's commitment to dignity will be measured not in slogans, but in actions. She said the incident had been documented from multiple angles and that transparency would be served best by clarity now. Her sentences were soft enough for a microphone and strong enough for a courtroom. She did not preach. She did not punish me. She governed. Thomas attempted another turn, the confessional one. He offered an apology coated in a varnish of misunderstood intent, the kind of apology that wafts toward the room hoping people will breathe it in and call the air fresh. He spoke of stress, of schedules, of holiday strain. He insisted that he respected everyone and had meant no harm. He smiled toward the silver-haired passenger across the aisle, toward the couple who had tightened into their seats, toward the vague middle distance where sympathy lives when it is not yet courage. His smile asked to be rescued from what he had done. The room did not reach. Angela held the silence long enough to let the apology show itself, then placed it where it belonged, not as a shield, but as a statement of what someone wished had been true. She told Thomas that words matter, that tone matters, that assumptions are actions, even when they come wrapped in courtesy. She repeated, without heat, the sentence he had spoken earlier about people not knowing their place, and she named what that sentence does to a person's dignity the moment it enters the air. She was not angry. Anger would have been too soft for what she was doing. She was exact. She turned to the crew and asked, clearly but kindly, why the benefit of the doubt had been handed to the louder party, why the manifest had not decided the matter before a request to deplane had been made, what training and habits stood behind those choices. Linda's eyes shone, not with defiance but with an answer trying to be born. David looked like a man who had just seen a map with his own neighborhood circled on it. The captain spoke about the pilot's economy. He said the decision had been wrong. He said he would own it. Ownership, that modest word, changed the angle of the moment from defense to repair. Angela accepted the sentence with a nod and then made her own. She said that a permanent ban would be placed on Thomas Reynolds for harassing a fellow passenger and creating a hostile environment in violation of policy. The sentence did not snap. It settled. Thomas opened his mouth and then closed it. His smile, at last, left his face. He looked not ruined but revealed, a man unclothed by the room's decision to tell the truth aloud. There was no cheering. There was nothing to cheer about. There was only a communal exhale, the sound of a burden lifting off people who had carried it without admitting it was in their arms. Angela continued, not to scorch the ground, but to plant something. She requested an instant report from each crew member involved to be filed not only through normal channels, but also to be transmitted directly to the board committee responsible for safety and equity. She asked that the training modules on bias and escalation be refreshed, and that a review be conducted of procedures that could accidentally turn convenience into prejudice. She did not say it all at once. She said step by step. She asked the captain by name to stand with her in that review. He said yes, in a simple way pilots say clear for takeoff, not as permission but as alignment. Linda added her own yes, the kind that comes from a chest finally able to breathe. David followed, his eyes a little hoarse and honest. In the rows behind, you could feel the subtle pivot of strangers becoming witnesses. A woman 2 rows back who had shrunk into the wall during the earlier noise now leaned forward with an open expression that looked a lot like pride and a little like relief. The silver-haired man cleared his throat and said, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear, that he appreciated what had just been said. Across the aisle, the couple who had exchanged brittle nods now looked at Angela with the kind of gratitude that makes people want to bake something and bring it to your house. No one clapped. It was better than that. The room had remembered its job. Emily, still framing for those who were not there, kept the lens wide and her breathing even, so the voice software would not stumble. She narrated the shape of what had happened without adjectives that could catch in a robot's throat. She said that consequences had been named and that reports would be filed. She said the captain had owned the mistake and had agreed to help repair it. She said the passenger who had been mistreated had not been required to raise her voice to be heard. Her viewers listened. Their comments began to braid into something like a chorus. They used words like respect and learning and about time. She did not show faces. She showed hands, shoulders, the wreath that now seemed to hang in the air that belonged to everyone. Thomas tried one last angle, the practical one. He asked, in a tone freshly scrubbed, whether there might be a way to reconsider the severity of the consequence given the season and his responsibilities on arrival. He gestured vaguely at his connection, at dinner plans, at the imagined avalanche of promises he could make if only the room would let him. Angela did not look at him as a problem to solve or as a villain to crush. She looked at him as a person in a community being asked to change. She told him, in the same radio-warm voice, that policies exist to protect dignity for all passengers, not at the convenience of anyone. She said that his responsibility now was to accept the boundary and to consider what it would take to make the boundary unnecessary in the future. The sentence did not humiliate him. It made a request of him that was larger than his schedule. The captain asked Angela if she would like a moment in the galley to sit with water. She smiled kindly and said she would remain in her seat. Returning to 2B, she smoothed the skirt of her suit and set the leather case beneath the seat once more, aligning the handle so it would not catch a passerby's shoe. She buckled her belt with the same care anyone uses when it is time to go where we are all already pointed. The cabin exhaled again. Overhead, the message about a delay updated from 12 minutes to a general assurance that departure would follow shortly. It sounded, for once, like a promise that could be kept. Angela looked up and addressed the nearby rows, not with a speech, but with a neighbor's voice. She thanked people for their patience. She told them that the airline would take the lessons of the last half hour, and that she hoped their holidays would be gentler for having shared this moment of clarity. The silver-haired man gave a small nod and said, "Bless you," which in America is less about religion than about respect when you do not have another word that fits. The couple across the aisle smiled with their eyes more than their mouths. Someone behind Emily murmured that they would be telling their family about this at dinner, and you could hear in the sentence that they meant to tell it right. The captain returned to the cockpit with a new stillness. Linda and David conferred quietly, their posture no longer defensive but purposeful, like nurses after a crisis, counting instruments to be sure none were left inside the patient. Thomas sat back in his assigned seat, wherever it was, and finally looked small enough to fit into it. He stared at his hands as if they had done something without his permission. The wreath at the door, red ribbon and all, seemed less like a decoration and more like a reminder that the season asks people to honor each other in practice, not just in cards. Emily felt her own shoulders sink from around her ears. She caught her breath to keep the audio smooth. She brought the lens in just enough to include Angela's profile and the neat arc of the window where rain now softened into a lace of droplets. She adjusted the mic so the text-to-speech would not misread the gentle S, the soft TH, the small commas she placed with her breath. The chat rolled like a river under moonlight, steady, reflective, a little amazed. A notification slid across her screen with the count of those watching, the number spelled in words. She did the math without moving her lips, and smiled into the quiet she kept on purpose. She lowered her voice and spoke for those who had stayed, for those who would watch later, for those who needed proof that patience and courage could sit in the same seat and not crowd each other. She whispered, careful and clear so that no synthetic voice would stumble, and signed the moment the way a notary signs a page that has waited too long for ink. You're watching history right now. 还我是美. Early summer laid a soft hand on the city and the cafe at the corner of 72nd, and Columbus wore the light like linen. Ceiling fans turned in unhurried circles. Cups chimed, doors opened with the friendly protest of old brass hinges and released little breezes perfumed with cut grass from the park. Angela Carter chose a small table near the window where the glass held a faint memory of spring rain. She ordered a pumpkin spice latte out of season because nostalgia has its own calendar, and slid a folded bill into the tip jar with a quiet thank you that warmed the barista's face. The radio over the counter hummed a public station at conversation volume, and the screen above the pastry case sent its bar of headlines across a ribbon of calm. In measured words, without flashes, without shouting, the ticker settled on the airline report and lingered there as if it, too, wanted to be sure of its own optimism. Customer satisfaction up by 35%. Complaint resolution times down by nearly half. New training modules completed by crews across every hub, with follow-up refreshers scheduled and funded. The figures were read out in words, not digits. So the machine voice in the corner of the cafe, destined to repeat the news on the station's midnight feed, would carry them without stumbling. Angela listened in that way people listen to good news that still carries the weight of the hard days that made it necessary. A woman at the next table, gray hair gathered into an elegant knot, glanced up and then over with a small nod that said she recognized the headline's origin story. Angela returned the nod with the neighborly warmth New York saves for those rare mornings when it remembers itself as a village. Emily Johnson arrived with a reporter's tote bag at her hip and a tripod that had learned to fold and unfold like a bird. She greeted the barista by name and tucked a couple of singles into the jar, asked after an ailing aunt mentioned weeks before, and ordered an iced coffee that glittered with cubes. She set the tripod near the window but kept the camera's eye turned toward hands, not faces, so consent and dignity could keep their seats. She leaned in toward Angela, and the two women exchanged the sort of hug that is mostly an easing of shoulders. Mutual, brief, human. Outside, a dog shook water from his coat with a satisfied grunt. The city shook some leftover rain from its own shoulders too. Emily's voice had practiced its way into a gentle authority, a broadcaster's cadence that still sounded like a granddaughter on the phone. For her segment, she was gathering stories about the small ways the reforms were showing up in real life. Not the policies in bullet points, but the moments that happened in aisles and jet bridges and boarding doors. The agent who said, "Sir" and "Ma'am" with equal warmth. The supervisor who checked both tickets twice before deciding. The captain who sent a follow-up note to passengers after delay was an accounting of what had gone wrong and how the procedure had changed. She spoke with a reporter's curiosity and a citizen's gratitude. Angela listened the way mentors listen, with the patience to let a younger person finish a thought and the habit of answering the question beneath the question. They sat, companionable and precise, and allowed the cafe to carry their pauses. Emily filmed a few establishing shots, hands, lifting cups, the thin white veil of steam, a stroller wheel squeaking once and then quieting with a drop of oil produced from nowhere by a father who had expected the squeak before it started. She asked Angela not for the camera at first, but for herself how it had felt to hold the line without raising her voice. Angela's answer was a small smile that held both exhaustion and peace. She said, The body knows when to be a door and when to be a wall and when to be a chair that does not move. The calf supplied its own chorus of minor characters, as calves do. A retired music teacher reading a magazine with a pencil tucked behind her ear. A uniformed doorman on his break. Instructing someone over the phone in the proper folding of a fitted sheet, proving once again that the world is mostly made of these lessons. A couple splitting a turkey sandwich with the efficiency of long habit, trading halves without looking. The barista slipped a thin cookie onto Angela's saucer with a conspiratorial smile and took none of the attention for herself. Tip jars rustled. Please and thank you crossed the counter in both directions like Curtis birds. Across the television, a more polished studio brightness took the place of the scrolling ribbon, and a host practice face gave way to a taped interview. Thomas Reynolds, hair neat, tie muted, sat in a chair a shade too small for the story he had to tell. He talked about a season of self-examination. He talked about consequences. He did not try to reframe a past sentence. He allowed it to sit in the room and name itself and then to be answered by a new one. He asked no one to forget. He asked only to be allowed the work of becoming someone different. The interviewer, to his credit, did not feed him rescue words or sharpen knives, but held the silence steady so the apology could either stand or fall on its own structure. It stood imperfect and unadorned, and then moved aside to let other voices through. Emily did not point her lens toward the screen. She kept it on the coffin and on the evidence of change being lived in small gestures. The way a man stepped aside from a crowded pickup counter so a woman with a cane could reach it. The way the barista balanced 3 orders without using any fine's patience as a tray. The way the door held open for the next person as if by its own hinge-born kindness. She asked Angela if she might record a short reflection. Angela agreed. They did not stage the shot. They did not rearrange the world. Emily set the mic, counted down with the same hand she had used months ago to steady a frightened lens, and nodded. Angela spoke in the warm timbre that had once belonged to a kitchen radio on a childhood counter. She described the difference between training that scolds and training that invites. She described procedure not as a boundary rope but as a promise of safety that includes dignity. She talked about the pleasure of being proved unnecessary by the very systems she had helped nudge into being. That is, the pleasure of walking down a jet bridge and being just another person who has somewhere to go and a window seat to love. She praised the ordinary graces that keep a nation from rattling itself apart. Kindness with a backbone, attention that does not play favorites, apologies that lead to changed behavior. When the camera rested, Emily grinned the way people grin when they have captured something true and simple. She boxed up her gear and suggested a quick walk to the park for a B-roll of pedestrians and green benches. Angela agreed, but lingered over the last sips of her latte as if saying goodbye to a season rather than a beverage. The bell over the calf door rang with the exact note of an old bicycle. A group of tourists consulted a paper map, as if reenacting a scene from a time before phones. A pair of joggers negotiated whose turn it was to buy smoothies. A delivery cyclist paused to hold a door with one foot and an elbow, a choreography of urban courtesy that deserves its own medal. They stepped out into the gentle blaze of the sidewalk. Taxi horns practiced their scales. A bus whispered to a stop with the dignity of a retired actor exiting a stage. The park's trees wore summer lightly, not yet the heavy green of August, and let a kind of chapel light slant through. In that changing light, Angela thought of the old scene inside the airplane cabin, the wreath shivering in the draft, the hush that comes before a pivot, the way a sentence can be both instrument and weather. She did not replay it to rehearse victory. She replayed it to remember the shape of the choice, not to move when movement would have made injustice tidier. Emily recorded a short sequence of feet and dogs and a pigeon so fat with crumbs it looked like a cushion. She interviewed a couple who had flown recently and had noticed a difference at the gate, a new habit of verifying both tickets, a new courtesy in asking, a new script that did not presume one truth before the scan. She kept names and faces soft, voices low, numbers in words, so a listener would not stumble over the digits when the story became audio at night. She thanked people as if each comment were a small gift hand-wrapped in tissue. And perhaps it was. The city passed, unbothered and attentive. They circled back toward the afternoon, and the corners of the afternoon rounded even further. Angela paused at the curb and watched a mother lift a child onto a city bus with a teamwork of strangers. A driver lowering the suspension, a teenager standing to offer a seat, a woman at the back signaling space with a polite wave. She thought of systems that work when their pieces keep their promises. She remembered a childhood bus route, where drivers knew every grandmother's name and waited when sneakers ran late. She felt the day ask her, not in words, to keep holding that kind of bus schedule in whatever boardroom she entered. Emily fell into stride beside her, and with the hesitation that honored old-school manners, asked for one last sentence for the day's piece. Not a speech, just the line that would let a listener feel the hinge of the story without the narrator pointing at the hinge. Angela nodded. She stood just inside the office again, where the window angled enough light into a soft arc. The barista pretended to adjust a stack of cups and in fact adjusted the sound of the room. The radio thinned into a respectful hum. Emily lifted the camera, the mic caught its breath, and Angela spoke as if telling a granddaughter how to hold a place in the line without making a scene. Sometimes the greatest power move is not moving at all. They let the sentence rest on the saucer of the moment, and then they both exhaled. Emily's face pleased into a quiet satisfaction that did not need to be shared online to be real. She packed. Angela thanked the barista again and tucked the second tip into the jar because gratitude often returns for a refill. They exchanged the "see you soon" of the Sword City friends mean sincerely even when calendars conspire against it. The bell on the door rang the old bicycle note again as Angela stepped onto the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed in her handbag, a courteous little vibration, not an alarm. She drew it out, its case softened by years of travel and the kind of careful handling that preserves tools rather than polishing trophies. On the screen, a new message hovered with a mild insistence of a stranger clearing a throat before speaking. Angela tapped it open and let the words come forward. Congress requests your presence at the upcoming hearing on airline discrimination. The quiet after the storm left more than a policy change. It left a memory of how dignity can steady a crowded room. What began as a single dispute in a narrow aisle became a mirror for an entire nation, showing both our fragility and our strength when truth is spoken with calm conviction. The heart of it was never about seats or schedules. It was about whether respect can be practiced in the small corners of daily life. From a gentle refusal to move to a public recognition of wrongs, the lesson rose clear. Compassion and accountability are not opposites, but companions that make justice real. Just as a steady porch light guides a traveler home on a dark evening, a single act of fairness can help us all find our way through prejudice and fear. Take a moment to notice the quiet gifts around you, the kindness of a stranger, the patience of a friend, for these are the threads that weave a safer, kinder community. And if this story touched you, consider passing that warmth along to someone whose journey today may feel heavier than it should.